Welcome to Austin Eras, the podcast that unravels Austin's transformation into a 21st century boomtown and explores its potential future. Brought to you by Collective Advisors, Austin Eras takes you on a journey through the city's evolving landscape and rich history, offering insights into its dynamic past, present, and future.
Welcome to the Austin Eras podcast. I have our guest today, Kendall Garrison. He's the president and CEO of Amplify Credit Union, where he has led the institution through significant growth and transformation. He has 46 years of experience in the banking industry. Kendall's career has spanned traditional banking, mortgage lending, and leadership roles that culminated in his current position at Amplify. Under his leadership, the credit union has expanded its reach across Texas and pioneered fee-free banking to improve financial accessibility for all customers. Before his time in Austin, Kendall was a community banker and entrepreneur. He founded Waco's first craft brewery, Bosque Brewing, in the 90s, and his journey from banking to beer and back to banking taught him some invaluable lessons in leadership, adaptability, and financial sustainability. Beyond his professional work, Kendall is deeply involved in community initiatives, serving as the board chair at St. Louis House, a nonprofit dedicated to helping women and children transition out of homelessness. And he's a self-described serial hobbyist. He has explored everything from exotic cars to scuba diving to, I'm sure, many other things. Kendall believes there has never been a better time to live in Austin, and he's passionate about shaping the city's future for generations to come. Kendall Garrison, thank you so much for being on the Austin Eras podcast.
It's an honor and a pleasure. I'm really glad to be here.
I'm glad we got connected, and it's been nice getting to know you as we were going through this process. You know, Amplify Credit Union, it's a pretty big credit union in town, and it's one of these things where you hear about it. You guys really have a great community presence. Started out with IBM. How did Amplify kind of get started?
So Amplify started in 1967 when IBM started the office products division here in Austin, in North Austin, where the domain is now.
Okay.
And essentially, it manufactured IBM's electric typewriters. And so a group of the executives of the typewriter plant decided IBM needed a credit union in Austin. And so it launched with 7 IBM executives. And, the origin stories of credit unions are, and they kept all the pooled money in a shoebox. So that's not exactly what happened at Amplify. They kept all the pooled money in one of those plastic Samsonite briefcases that you would have in the 70s. That's absolutely true.
That was it?
Yes. The founder's name was Bob Morrissey. And it was his briefcase that he donated to the cause.
All right. So credit unions had a very early basic origination here with this, but it turned into something pretty large pretty quickly.
It didn't start really fast, but it has picked up speed exponentially. You know, it started with a very small group. The IBM contingent here in Austin were blue collar because they were factory workers. Mm-hmm. They were assembling typewriters. And the character of the organization changed as IBM in Austin changed over time. So as it moved into chip design, chip manufacturing, consulting, and so our field of membership changed with it from a working person's credit union to really a white-collar and technology-focused credit union.
So one of the things is you obviously weren't at Amplify your entire career, right, but you have 46 years of banking experience. So tell me a little bit about kind of getting into banking. I know you grew up in Texas, not Austin, Port Neches?
Yes, I went to high school in a little town outside of Beaumont called Port Neches, Texas. Graduated from high school there and then went on to school at Lamar University in Beaumont.
That's fantastic. So you grew up, you're living kind of the southeast Texas area. What was your first perceptions of Austin? When did you first get here? When did you see it first?
So like many Texas kids, your parents take you to see the Capitol when you're little. And so our summer vacation, we went to Texas. And so we came to Austin to see the Capitol, and that was 1968. And Austin was a lot different place in 1968. You know, the upper deck of I-35 was not complete. That wasn't open until the early 70s. And Austin was really a small town. It was state government, and it was UT. And there wasn't much else.
But yet your parents thought to take you there because it was more exciting than Beaumont or Port Neches.
Absolutely. Any place is more exciting than Port Neches. Trust me on this. And so, and that was 1968 was really the beginning of technology starting to come to Austin. Tracor and, of course, IBM being one of the early technology companies that focused here.
So when you came to Austin, what did you look forward to the most other than going to the Capitol?
Well, it was something different, right?
Yeah.
There were the hills in northwest Austin. Port Neches is on the shockingly flat coastal plain. I think we were about 8 feet above sea level or something like that. And so really seeing different geography, topography that I'd never seen before.
Sure.
And even though Austin was a small town, it still felt kind of like a big city because it was bigger than where I was from.
Yeah, of course. So you go there, you visit during your childhood, you go to Lamar University, you get into banking. And you're a couple places in Texas, so you're experiencing the whole Texas thing, but you're not in Austin yet.
I'm not in Austin yet. I don't get to Austin permanently as a resident until 2010.
So you're relatively new to Austin in this whole point, but you're a longtime Texan. Let's talk a little bit about Waco. I want to talk about this because it's not too often you talk to someone that said, I owned a brewery, but not only did I own a brewery, I owned the first one in the city. And I got into it really before everyone else did. So tell me a little bit about this, Waco's first craft brewery, Bosque Brewing. How did you start this? Why did you start this?
So this was, you mentioned earlier that I'm a serial hobbyist.
Yeah.
So this was a hobby that got out of hand, quite honestly.
Okay.
And I was a home brewer. I was making beer in my kitchen and experimenting with different beer styles and brewing techniques. And really scaled up my home brewery to do a 15.5 gallon batch at a time. And I really started making 1 gallon batches at a time. And I thought, well, I might be able to do this for a job. I might be able to make a living at this. Turns out, maybe not so much. But nevertheless, I raised some money. I made a big contribution of my own money and built a brewery from scratch. And it was a production brewery. So we ran a bottling line and a kegging line. And it's interesting that we're talking about this because just a couple of days ago, I had a bunch of old VHS tapes that have images of the bottling line running and the early days of the brewery. And I watched those yesterday.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it is.
So, I mean, 30 years later, you still get a little fun out of this thing. Now, I actually did a little bit of digging. And you may or may not know, but I read that Southern Roots Brewing recently, like about 2 years ago, brought back one of your original brews as kind of a recognition of being the first brewery.
Yeah, they did. It was interesting. I get an email, and the email said, is this Kendall Garrison, the OG brewer from Waco? And it's like, yep, this is the one. And so they reached out to me and asked if we could do a collab, and they could bring back my biggest selling beer from the 90s. And it was really interesting because we planned this out a few months into the future. And one of the things I had to do was recreate the recipe.
Oh, no.
And so I dug through all of my records and archives and everything. I could not find the original recipe. We were about 3 weeks out from having to order the supplies. And I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning and it was fully in my head. I remembered it because I was stressing over it because I was going to have to recreate it. And I remembered it. I got up, wrote it down, sent an email to myself in that moment. And then the next morning, I sent them the recipe in its entirety.
So what type of beer was that?
It was a light lager. It was called Bosque Honey Lager. And essentially, it was pale gold color, lightly hopped. But in the final stage of brewing, we would add into the brew kettle about 500 pounds, 540 pounds actually, of Guajillo honey. So it was it changed the character of the beer fairly significantly. So
Yeah, 540 pounds versus how much of the other liquids were in there?
So it was about 1,000 gallons
Okay.
of it's called wort. W-O-R-T. And so we would add 540 pounds to that in the last 5 minutes of the boil, and it would increase the specific gravity of the final product and boost the alcohol content.
Almost like an amateur engineer or chemist in the sense.
It was rocket surgery, as we called it. So
now I read this, that you also were very popular for making root beer.
We did.
You had a top secret root beer recipe. Is this right?
So we experimented and built our own root beer. I had 3 small sons at the time. The oldest was 7 and the youngest was 3. And so I wanted to make something they could enjoy too. So we made root beer, and we used imperial cane sugar in that.
Okay.
So it was our root beer version of Mexican Coke.
So I heard that you had the only recipe, and you kept it in your wallet for a lot of years, that it was a top secret recipe.
It is. I still have the recipe, and I still have the wallet.
Really?
I do.
I love it. I love it. So that obviously brought you a whole different world of going from banking into brewing and running a business. What were the lessons that you learned from doing that and then getting back into banking?
So it was interesting. When you're a banker, you don't really realize the difference between income and cash flow. When you're running a small business, it is all about cash flow.
Yeah.
It is, how do we generate cash flow to pay our suppliers, to pay our employees, to have enough money to expand. So it is all about cash flow and much less about quote unquote net income. So that was a really valuable lesson I learned. And then when I returned to banking and moved into the commercial lending business, maybe understand a lot more about how small businesses operate. And it teaches you a lot about yourself. It teaches you what you will do and what you won't do. It teaches you determination. It teaches you some grit, and it teaches you to throw out the playbook. You often hear people say, winners never quit. That's not true. Winners know when to quit.
Yeah.
And so that actually shaped one of my philosophies that we run Amplify by today, which is, we don't play games we can't win.
I love that. So let's talk a little bit more about Amplify, because you were in banking, then you entered the credit union world. When did you first get into the credit union space? Was that with Amplify?
So I came to work for Amplify, and that was my first trip to a credit union. And so I had a recruiter call and ask me if I was interested in coming to work for a credit union in Austin, Texas. And my immediate response was, hell no, because I'd spent my career as a banker, and you're indoctrinated to think that if you work for a credit union, you're the third string, and you can't make it in banking. And I very quickly found that is absolutely not true. In fact, the opposite is true. There is more innovation. There is more determination. There is a different worldview in the credit union space than there is in the banking space.
Yeah, you've been quoted as saying you found your people when you got to the credit union space. So what do you mean by that when you think about your colleagues and when you lead Amplify?
So when I said I found my people, what I meant by that was I took Amplify as the opportunity to do the things that I knew how to do, but to do it for the right reason. And in banking, you can sometimes have an adversarial relationship with your customer. And as a credit union, we're founded to improve the financial lives of our customer. And so when you're in the financial services business and your interests are aligned with that of your customer, they're not at odds with one another, then you can do some really amazing things.
One of those amazing things that I'm still astounded by is this idea of fee-free banking. To me, it kind of blows my mind. I know that you got to this idea, but to me, it's like, how do you do that, and how do you make it work in a financial model for a credit union?
So you can make it work if you decide that this is the thing that you're going to do. And when you put your all of your eggs in one basket, so to speak, then you have to realize that there are better ways to make money, there are easier ways to make money. And so our fee-free banking model is that we don't charge our customers any fees on their deposit accounts. And, we're essentially borrowing their money so we can turn around and lend that money to borrowers who need home loans or small business loans or whatever the case may be. And so we're borrowing someone's money. What sort of world does it make sense for me to ask you to borrow your money and then charge you for that service?
It doesn't.
It doesn't. It makes no sense in the world. And so we just decided that wasn't the way we wanted to make money. And so we make money by increased interchange income. So when our customers swipe their debit card at H-E-B or to buy gas or whatever, we get paid a small fee to facilitate that. And so increasing debit card swipes is the way we essentially paid for that.
I love it. So you're sitting there in a board meeting, you're hearing people say this, and you just said, hey, I want to eliminate all banking fees? I mean, how do you get there? So
we were in a meeting, and we were being presented with some data that customers don't like to be charged bank fees. And it's like, well, this is revolutionary. Hope we didn't pay a whole lot for this study. And so I just threw it out. Well, why don't we just stop? And they thought it was a joke. They thought I was like, everybody laughed and said, yeah, sure. Yeah, you just sit right there. And so we started to turn it over in our mind. How can we do this? Is this a thing that is feasible for us to do? Because this is a one-way door. This is a one-way door decision. We can't take the moral and ethical high ground on bank fees and 2 years later say, oh, you know what, never mind. We were just kidding.
That's right.
And so we spent actually 2 years building our systems to be able to do this. And it is astoundingly difficult because our core banking systems, merchant systems, online banking systems aren't designed to be fee-free.
Yeah.
They're designed to charge a fee. And so it took us 2 years to figure out how to turn off all those fees.
So one thing when it comes to fees in banking is they disproportionately affect certain areas of the population. And I know in Austin with the rising cost of living and inflation, this has to be a huge factor. Who does it help?
So bank fees disproportionately fall on younger people. They fall on people of color, and they fall on people of modest means. So at the end of the day, people like you and me don't pay bank fees, right?
Sure.
And it's the person who can least afford it that accidentally swipes their debit card and they don't have enough money in their checking account, and bam, there's a $25 charge. And they do this 2 or 3 or 4 times, and they come to the realization they're so far upside down in their checking account that they have to walk away from it.
Yeah.
And then they're on a thing called check systems, and no other bank will open an account for them because they've caused another financial institution a loss. And then they have to go to the check cashers of the world, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And so we found that after we stopped charging bank fees and SF fees, our checking account charge-offs actually went down. And every single person said, you guys are crazy. Your charge-offs are going to go through the roof because you're going to be adversely selected by a certain group of people. That turns out to be not true.
That's fascinating. So if we take that further, you guys start this fee-free banking. How many years ago was that?
This was February the 2nd of 2022, because 2/2/22 just makes sense, right?
I love it. All right. So 3 years plus now into this thing. Are other credit unions following your lead? Are other banks following your lead?
No. We're the only full-service financial institution, meaning has branches, offers the full suite of services like overdraft protection, wire transfers, ACH. We're the only one in the country that's done this.
That's amazing. So it seems like your view of financial services is not a zero-sum game. Can you share more about that abundance mentality that's kind of shaped your leadership style and decision-making?
Yeah, so I think that you said it just exactly the way I say it, that life is not a zero-sum game and banking is not a zero-sum game. So in order for us to be successful at Amplify, XYZ bank or XYZ credit union does not have to lose. So in an environment that we live in Austin, where there is an unbelievable abundance of economic activity, I think that if we work together and if we focus on solving the larger issues in our economy and our society, then we're all going to have an abundance of opportunity.
The charge-off example is a great example of that, right?
Yeah.
That it worked out. So the financial landscape is constantly shifting here. I know one of the biggest issues we have in this city is the rising cost of housing, the rising cost of goods and services, people trying to find a place to actually live in the city of Austin, if not go all the way to Kyle or Buda or Leander. What do you see from a credit union perspective as the biggest financial headwinds and opportunities for both Austin and the credit union space?
So, financial challenges, financial headwinds, you nailed it, affordability is our biggest factor. And so it's not just housing affordability, which is significant. You know, the average, the median house cost is in the upper 400s. And if you're a firefighter who's married to a teacher, you are very, very, very challenged to find a home that you can afford in Travis County based on your compensation, especially when we see mortgage interest rates at 7% where they are today. But there are other things that factor into that. So there's the affordability of transportation. And with people having to live in Kyle or Buda or Manor or Hutto, or you pick the place, and spend an hour in the car every day, that's a grind. That grinds on you. That takes both a financial toll and a psychological toll because you've added 2 hours to your workday. Affordable childcare is a problem. If you have a couple of kids, you're going to have a pretty significant annual
it's a good bill.
Cost to that.
Yeah.
And so I know this because I have a son that lives in Round Rock, and they just had their second child, but they needed to wait until their first child got into kindergarten so they wouldn't have to pay the full ride for daycare for 2 kids.
It's family planning. That's really crazy that you have to go to that level.
Yeah. And so I think there are things that address that. There's some city programs, Affordability Unlocked, which increases density if you're building units for affordable income, median income folks. I think Project Connect, that's going to improve our public transit infrastructure, is going to be pretty important to us. Now, that's going to be a long time into the future, right? It's going to take years for that to happen. But if we address it today, it will ultimately happen. You know, the old saying is the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the second best time's today. And so if we start to address some of these issues right now today, I think we're going to solve them sooner rather than later.
Kendall, I've got another question for you. I think Amplify is well known for their culture in the community, what it's like to work there and be an employee there. I heard you say that a majority of people work from home for a lot of it. How do you build a culture when people are working from home, and then the people that are in the branches? How do you make that all work as a leader?
You know, that's an interesting question, and a thing that we had to address in the aftermath of the pandemic. Before the pandemic, we were all in the office every day. We only had one employee, maybe 2 employees that were remote. After the pandemic, we all took our laptops and our monitors and our office chair and went home, and we hadn't been back since. And, you know, you have to maintain a culture mindfully. It doesn't happen by accident. And it's hard work. You have to understand the needs of your employees, of your team. And so one of the ways we do that is what we call culture conversations. So when people come to work for Amplify, their first day of employment, we talk about our mission, our vision, our values, our service standards, the things that make us work as a company. And a couple of times a month, we'll have a small group culture conversation meeting with 10 or 12 people from around the organization, and we ask them, what is your favorite core value? How do you see it in action? How do you see it when we fall short of our core values or our service standards? What are the things that you have learned in the last 90 days at Amplify? What do you want to learn in the next 90 days? If there's one thing about Amplify, what could you change? And so you don't ask these questions just to ask the questions. You ask to understand, and then you act upon those when you're presented information. We have a thing called culture of welcome, and we welcome people as they are, who they are. Every stitch of evidence tells us that organizations that have different lived experience, different worldviews, different ways of doing things perform better. And we are hotly competitive, even though we don't think it's a zero-sum game, but we like to do well. We like to metric our business and do well against the metrics that we've established for ourselves. And having a team that brings those qualities to the table gives us the opportunity to do better. And we've established that over the last 5-ish years, and it's as strong today as it ever has been. And no matter what is in fashion or out of fashion, we're not going to walk away from culture of welcome, because we think that is the thing that makes Amplify a special place.
That is, it's unique. And one thing I've heard you do is you have a strong culture of community building as well. So how do you do that with the employees and volunteerism?
So again, making our community a better place is in our DNA. And we give all of our employees 40 hours a year to volunteer in the community. Doesn't have to be for my pet project, St. Louis House. It doesn't have to be for Caritas, or it doesn't have to be for Community First Village. All those places are great, and we facilitate those opportunities. But it can be a cause that's important to our employees, right? A thing that they see a need and they reach out into the community and try to make it a better place.
I'm sure at this point in your career, 46 years in the banking industry, you have people come to you for career advice a lot. People that say, hey, I want to go work for Amplify, or I want to be in the banking and credit union space. What kind of advice do you give people that are entering the career path?
It's the simplest advice in the world. And that advice is, if you see a job that needs to be done, do it. Doesn't matter if someone has given you a directive to do it. It doesn't matter if you feel empowered to do it. If you see a thing that needs to be done and you know how to do it, then do it. And your teammates will see it. They'll recognize it. Your supervisor is going to see it and recognize it. And you're going to have the opportunity to be promoted over the course of your career. And I wasn't able to articulate it when I was a young banker. But as it turns out, that's how I accidentally lived my life. And it worked out okay for me, right? And I see people following that advice throughout our organization all the time.
Yeah, you're promoting innovation, you're promoting execution, you're promoting finding that problem and solving it. I mean, that's a great way to build a business.
It is.
A great way to build an organization. We'll be right back with a message from our sponsor on the Austin Airs podcast.
Calling all Austin business professionals and community leaders. Revitalize your after-work plans, and let's kick off a new tradition with the Austin Social Circuit. Join us for an evening of networking, great food and drinks, and even better company. Expand your circle, enjoy a laid-back vibe, and connect with like-minded Austinites. It's all happening the first Thursday of each month, with locations alternating between North and South Austin to keep things exciting. This initiative is powered by Collective Advisors. Find out the location of our next gathering and learn more by following Collective Advisors on Instagram and LinkedIn. Bring a friend, share the fun, and strengthen our Central Texas community. See you there, Austin.
Welcome back to the Austin Airs podcast. I have our guest, Kendall Garrison, CEO and president of Amplify Credit Union. I want to talk to you a little bit more about the community. I think, Austin, a lot of this podcast is about the love and passion we have for the city. You got here in 2010. I know outside of work, you're doing some great work in the community. St. Louis House is one of those places. You're currently the chair. What about that mission so meaningful to you? Can you tell us more about St. Louis House?
Yes, St. Louis House is a small but deeply impactful nonprofit organization that focuses on women-led households that are suffering from housing instability. And so if you're a woman with a couple of kids, you're not in a tent somewhere because Child Protective Services gets involved.
Sure.
But what you're doing is you're living in your car, you're living on a friend's sofa or a revolving circle of friends' sofas.
Yeah.
You're renting a mattress in an apartment with 20 or 30 other people in it. And it's not a situation that provides stability for a mom or for her kids. And so the best thing that can happen is stability for children, the opportunity to go to the same school, to have housing security. And so what St. Louis House does is owns a couple of apartment complexes, serves about 46 families, lets moms stay in the program for 4 years to get some job training skills, to get some stability. And the women that come into this program generally earn less than $20,000 a year when they enter the program. And this gives them the chance to be ready to go to affordable housing provided by people like Foundation Communities, things of that nature. And the thing that is mostly impactful and speaks to me is that it is beneficial for the second generation. So I have the good fortune to have been adopted. And I think I'm the luckiest guy in the world because My family provided some stability for me. They gave me the opportunity for education, and it changed the trajectory of my life. And so if we can do this for 50 children at a time, I think that's meaningful. So it's a small number, but deeply impactful.
So if someone has an interest in helping and contributing to St. Louis House, how would they go about doing that?
stlouishouse.org
Wonderful.
Is their website. And they've got fantastic volunteer opportunities, chances for people to get involved hands-on. So it's a fantastic organization, and I feel lucky to have found them.
I love that for this community. That's amazing. So now we're going to switch to a little bit of fun. You are known as a serial hobbyist. So I've heard you talk about scuba diving. I've heard you talk about motorcycles, perhaps.
Motorcycles, yeah.
Maybe some fun cars. What's your latest obsession, and how do you balance your personal passions with your professional life?
So it's interesting. My current obsession is fast cars, and having the opportunity to take those to the track. So that's kind of fun. But the balancing of my personal life and my private life is really interesting, and it's kind of a challenge. When I became CEO, it dawned on me that, hey, guess what? You don't get a day off.
Yeah, that's right.
Because every single day, I'm thinking about something that's impactful to our business. I read a thing, I see a thing, I'll email it to myself so I can send it to one of my colleagues during the work week. You never find yourself where the health of your organization and the welfare of your team is very far from your mind.
Yeah.
And so you just sort of fit in the fun where you can, right? And and I'm fortunate enough to have a pretty flexible work schedule. We at Amplify are mostly remote. And so if I need to escape for an hour or two during the day, I can. And if I have to work all weekend, then guess what? That's just part of it. So
yeah, it's the blend of that. Interesting. So you fast cars, scuba diving, all these different things, the brewery. So you've had a theme throughout your life. If there is a great hobby that someone could take up here in Austin, what would it be? I mean, the fast cars, obviously we've got Formula One right here.
Right.
What other things do you really see that Austin kind of aligns with for people that are serial hobbyists?
Okay, so this might not fall in line with all the others, but I would suggest to you that there are a lot of rowing opportunities on Town Lake.
All right.
There's the Waller Creek Boathouse. There's the Texas Rowing Center. It's the opportunity to get involved and engaged with a group of people who are fitness enthusiasts, and it teaches you some teamwork because you're in an 8-person boat and you got to be all rowing at the same sink and in the same direction. So
I love it.
That's a super fun way to get out and enjoy the world a little
Easy
bit.
to access too, right there.
Yeah.
So I know that you told me that you moved downtown a few years ago.
About 3 years ago, yeah.
And so you've got a great world all right outside your doorstep. Tell me a little bit about where you would take your guests to when they visit Austin. I heard you've got some great dive bar, speakeasy kind of things that you like.
Yeah, I am a dive bar speakeasy aficionado. So speakeasies downtown, Kinfolk that is by the convention center is a great spot. Dumont's Down Low is another of my favorites. And then, of course, all of the old classic dive bars. What used to be the Poodle Dog Lounge is now the Aristocrat on Burnett Road. Jenny's Little Longhorn, it's a great spot. And, of course, the Continental Club, which is just across the river from me. So
I love it. Continental Club sounds like a good time. Every time you walk by, there's something fun happening there. So that's a great place to kind of go. Now, if you could mention one weird thing about Austin, either still around or maybe it's gone, what is it that you want Austin to keep forever?
So what I want Austin to keep forever is the ability to go to dozens of different places to see a show. You know, like I said, the Continental Club. And there are things from days gone by, right? Armadillo,
sure,
Liberty Lunch. And those were cool spots, and they're not coming back. But what I think we need to do is preserve our cultural heritage and the Red River District, where there are plenty of live music opportunities, and just continue to let Austin enjoy the things that made Austin what it is today.
Love it. Yes, I want to go to the future now. I want to start thinking based on this kind of conversation about weird in the future, and think about some things both in the business world as well as the Austin world that we can kind of talk about here. So One thing you said is the way it's been done doesn't have to continue. What's something in the financial industry you believe needs to change beyond the fee-free banking?
So what I think needs to change in banking is an alignment with your customer. I think that is the most important thing that needs to change in banking. I think there are too many banks and credit unions, quite frankly. There needs to be a number, because community financial institutions like Amplify and like the community banks that are based here really provide the lifeblood of capital for small and medium-sized businesses. And so the power of banking shouldn't be concentrated in just a few. But when you're a bank, you have to, in many cases, price your loans based on your competitor in your market that is the worst decision maker. And you have to price your deposits based on the person who is most desperate for deposits in your market. And so there's no real rationale that makes the combination of those two things work.
Yeah.
And so a smaller number of competitors that specialize in niches in the business and aren't all things to all people, I think is what we're going to see financial services go to.
Also, I mean, credit unions have been around for decades. They seem to, I grew up in the Midwest, so coming down here, credit unions are much bigger than what I grew up around. But you predicted there could only be 2,000 left in 20 years if we think about the entire United States. How do you see that affecting local banking and financial services?
So I think you're going to see, there are about 4,500 credit unions now. And so I think we'll be in the neighborhood of 2,000 within the next couple of decades. 200 to 300 a year will merge into each other. The majority of credit unions are very, very small. The collective balance sheet of all credit unions in the U.S. is about $2.5 trillion, which is smaller than the balance sheet of J.P. Morgan Chase. Okay.
Okay.
So this is really a fairly small industry, and so those folks are going to have to join together collectively to serve their members over time, because compliance costs get higher, the regulatory burden gets higher, the competitive burden is more challenging every single day. And even though Amplify is by order of magnitude smaller than the big banks,
sure,
our customers expect the same products and services from us. Our mobile app, our online banking, the way we interact with them, and our contact center, the AI enabled tools that we're using to serve them. We have to do the same thing as the big banks.
It used to be that you had to be a member of something specific to be able to be a credit union member. How does that work today? If someone said, hey, I want to go to Amplify, or hey, I want to go to competitor credit union, how do they do that?
So you still have what's referred to as a common bond. And so members of Amplify have a common bond. We started as IBM. Only IBM employees could join. Then we converted to a community credit union. And so you had to reside in the 5-county Austin MSA in order to join. And then in 2017, we converted to a state charter. So anyone in the state of Texas can be a member of Amplify.
Okay. So if we think about Amplify and we talk about these 2,000 credit unions remaining maybe in a couple decades, what does Amplify have to do to be successful here in the Austin market?
So what we have to do is we have to be the compelling choice for the next generation of member. People talk about we want to remain relevant, maintain our relevance to our customer. We think it's more than that. We think you have to be the compelling choice for your banking, fee-free. That's the differentiator. That's for consumer and business. We're in the mortgage banking business, the home loan business. And so we need to be the compelling technology choice for customers in Central Texas. And our commercial lending business, we have the ability to understand credit risk and take things that look risky to other people, and we're pretty good at assessing that risk. And so that gives us the opportunity to have a broader lending portfolio and help more small businesses, because small businesses drive employment in the U.S. economy.
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to see more of those small businesses be successful in Austin. Hence, the Keep Austin Weird was all about small businesses thriving.
Right.
So I agree. Tell me about Austin in general. When we think about you, What's it going to take to keep you in Austin the next couple of decades? You came here in 2010. You lived here ever since. But what does Austin have to keep doing? Either keep doing or change in the next decades?
So I think Austin needs to keep doing a lot of the things that has made Austin successful, which is having a business-friendly climate, which is having a business development group that is actively searching for new opportunities, and that's in the form of Opportunity Austin, that works hard to source new businesses, new jobs to come to Austin. So I think that's one of the things Austin has really done right. Continue doing that. Things that we're going to need to change. Address the affordability crisis. Understand what some of the social issues that we have that faces our city, and find a way to compassionately help people that need help. People often talk about we have a homelessness crisis in Austin. I think it's less than that. Then we have a mental health crisis in Austin. And that's not just in Austin, that's in the state. We have underfunded mental health services for decades, and we're going to need to address that.
Yeah, there's a lot of things we've underfunded as a state that we're going to have to address, because I read that in 2045, our population will be over 42 million in this state, and California will have shrunk to under 31 million. So there's a huge population change expected, and there's a lot of infrastructure. So you kind of wonder where Austin's going to play in that space.
And, we're starting our I-35 redevelopment just a month or so ago. We need to be working on the next redevelopment. Because by the time this one was done, we're going to need to start over. Yeah,
exactly. You got to have more lanes, got to keep getting bigger every time. So you have children and grandchildren in the area. You mentioned you have a son up in Round Rock. What do you hope for them if they live in Austin the rest of their lives? What do you hope for their future, for that next generation?
So, I hope that they will continue to live in a community that gives them all the economic opportunity they could hope for. I hope that they live in a community and in a state that views their neighbors with compassion and care and concern. Care and concern for your community is one of the 8 cooperative principles that Amplify was founded on. And I hope we're able to continue to find that as a community.
If we think about the future when it comes to the community and the community banking and credit union space, how we handle money, whether it's physical currency, whether it's coins, we're talking about the penny, is that going to exist, et cetera, et cetera. But what innovations do you see disrupting banking in the coming years? What's going to change there?
So the craziest thing in my mind is I never spent a minute of my life thinking about payments and payment systems until the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And if you look at the way payments happen in the U.S., it's antiquated as compared to the rest of the world. We're going to see the ability through a thing called FedNow or RTP, real-time payments. That is going to change the way money moves. People barely write checks anymore. And when they do, there's a very high level of fraud in exchanging checks. And so we're going to see payment systems either driven on your phone, pay by bank at merchants. You can already do that on websites. So we're going to see the shifting landscape in payments is really going to change the way you move money. And money movement is everything when you think about how your checking account works. The fintechs are going to disrupt many banks and credit unions because they can't get ahead on payments.
Yeah, I look at like a Venmo and PayPal that have been around for 10, 15, 20 years, and it feels like everyone's exchanging money that way. How does that kind of align with how the banking system's changing? Is it the same, or is it a little bit different the way it's packaged?
So it's interesting because when you send somebody money on Venmo, it's tied to your debit card. And today Venmo is our friend because we get interchange income every time someone sends money on Venmo, and Venmo pays for it. Well, if you think Venmo is not busily trying to disrupt those payment rails to cut out the debit card and build those separate payment rails, you're wrong. And, the merchant pays for a debit card swipe when you go to H-E-B.
Yeah.
If you think that the merchant wants to pay 30 cents per debit card swipe, you're wrong. So they're working on systems to be able to access your bank account directly on their payment terminals, their POS terminals.
So the more that you can get involved in that system and be involved in that, the more that you guys aren't getting cut out.
Correct.
Okay. Interesting. So when you think about your career and you think about the fact that you're probably closer to the end than to the beginning, even though 46 years, you look like you go a lot longer than this. So you could add another couple decades if you want to. But what do you want your legacy to look like when you retire?
So that's an interesting question, and I have to tell you that I don't spend 1 minute of my life thinking about my legacy. What I want to do is have our team ready to succeed me when it's time for me to go. I want them to have the knowledge. I want them to have the experience. I want them to have all the tools that they need to be successful, and nobody needs me anymore. And once that day comes, then I'm going to leave it to the young folks, and I'm going to go do what I need to do for the second act of my life.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you here, Kendall, for the podcast. I think that you've really given us a lot of amazing feedback and knowledge on what it's like to run a credit union here in Austin, what it's like to be a leader and give back, what it's like to build a culture, as well as how to have a little fun too on the side and really enjoy the Austin area. So I just thank you so much for coming to Austin Eras and sharing your viewpoints, and thanks again for being on the show.
Well, this has been great. I appreciate the conversation.
Austin Eras, featuring Adam Flagg, is brought to you by Collective Advisors. Collective Advisors offers investment advisory services through CWM LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Guests on Austin Eras are not affiliates of CWM LLC, and opinions expressed by guests may not reflect those of CWM LLC. This show is intended for educational and entertainment purposes and is not intended to provide specific legal, tax, or other professional advice. For a comprehensive review of your personal situation, always consult with a qualified professional.